Welcome to the Deep Dive. You send us the fascinating stuff you're reading, watching, and we try and pull out the really interesting nuggets, the stuff that makes you go, huh.
Exactly.
So today, a listener pointed us towards a YouTube video. It's by Motek called The Man Who Saw the Future. And, well, it's a wild ride.
Oh, yeah. Sounds intriguing already.
It is. We're diving into the story of Paul Amadeus Dino. He was supposedly a Swiss teacher who, get this, allegedly developed the ability to foresee the future after spending a whole year in a coma.
A whole year. Wow. That kind of story definitely grabs you, makes you think about, consciousness, what's possible beyond our normal experience.
Totally. So here's what we're going to try and unpack today. First, these two really mysterious comas that supposedly kicked everything off.
Okay.
Then, his behavior afterwards, which was pretty odd, including a move to Athens and this really specific prediction he made at the Parthenon.
Okay. Interested to hear about that.
Then there's the diary. His student, George Papahatsis, published it, and apparently it describes Dino's experience in the year 3906.
39906. Seriously, that's quite a leap.
Right. Mind-blowing stuff. We'll touch on some of those predictions, how accurate they might seem. And then the big question, was any of it real? Genuine foresight or, just an elaborate story?
Yeah, the authenticity question, that's always the core issue with these kinds of tales.
Exactly. So yeah, get ready. This one has some twists. It really pushes the boundaries of what you think is possible.
Sounds like a perfect deep dive topic then. Challenging our ideas about time, reality. Let's get into it.
Okay, so these comas.
Yeah.
Our source, the video, mentions two. First one, 1917, lasted about 2 weeks. Not insignificant, but
not a full year.
exactly. Then 1921, boom, coma for a whole year. And apparently doctors just had no explanation, baffled.
A year-long coma with no clear cause.
That's definitely the pivotal event here, isn't it?
Yeah.
It opens the door to all sorts of speculation about what happened to his mind during that time. And it's right after that coma, the year-long one, that everything changes for Dino. The video says his personality just flipped.
Flipped how?
He became really withdrawn, reclusive, got heavily into philosophy, and, maybe the biggest surprise, became deeply religious, which apparently was totally unlike him before. He'd been more of a skeptic.
Huh. That's a radical shift. It makes you wonder, was it a genuine spiritual awakening triggered by the experience, or maybe, some kind of neurological effect from the coma itself?
Good question. Either way, it definitely sets a strange backdrop for everything that follows.
It certainly does.
So fast forward a bit. Dino moves to Athens. He's teaching French and German there. And this is where that Parthenon anecdote comes in.
Right, you mentioned that. What happened?
He's talking to some young guy looking at the ruins. Dino says something thoughtful like, just as we look back at the past through these ruins, maybe we can look forward too. He felt the Parthenon itself would still be standing in 2,000 years.
Okay, the nice philosophical point. Connecting past and future.
Yeah, but then he gets weirdly specific. He says, with total certainty, that in 2,000 years, the metal bars they had around the Parthenon back then, they'd be gone.
Just gone out of the blue.
Yep, just stated it like a fact. Apparently, the young man was pretty unnerved by how sure Dino sounded.
I can imagine that kind of specific, unfounded certainty. It's unsettling. It hints at something beyond just guessing, doesn't it?
It does. And it's around this time in Athens he meets the student, George Papahatsis, the guy who eventually publishes the diary.
Ah, the key figure in getting the story out.
Right. So Dino's health starts failing, tuberculosis. And as he gets sicker, he becomes obsessed with trying to remember what happened during that year he was in the coma.
Trying to piece it together before the end.
Seems like it. And this is where the diary comes in. He supposedly gives it to Papahatsis, says it's an exercise, translate this German text. But he makes Papahatsis promise never to publish it.
The forbidden manuscript. Always makes you wonder what's inside, doesn't it? Why keep it secret? Too unbelievable. Too personal.
Or both, maybe. But of course, Papahatsis doesn't keep that promise, eventually.
When did it finally come out?
Not until 1972. Dino died way back in 1924. So nearly 50 years later, Papahatsis releases it. And the contents, well, like I said, extraordinary.
Okay, so what did the diary claim happened during that year?
According to the diary, the first day he slipped into the coma, he didn't experience darkness. He woke up.
Woke up where?
In this strange, beautiful hospital. It was set in this gorgeous countryside, everything bathed in this weird pink light. He apparently even wondered if he was on another planet.
Wow. That's vivid. A very dreamlike yet specific starting point. Almost pulls you right into his experience.
Definitely disorienting. He realized it was a hospital, but totally futuristic. He was in pain for about 9 days, apparently, confused, but then recovered incredibly fast. But here's the really bizarre part.
Go on.
He finally sees his reflection, and the face looking back. Not his.
Whoa. Okay, hold on, body swap. We've just jumped genres here, haven't we? From medical mystery to sci-fi.
Pretty much. Imagine looking in the mirror and seeing a total stranger. A psychological shock.
Unimaginable. So whose body was it supposed to be?
Well, he couldn't understand the language people were speaking either, though he thought he heard some, Anglo-Scandinavian roots in it. Eventually, he pieces together that he's in the body of a man named Andreas Nordum.
Andres Nordum, okay. How did that happen, according to the diary?
Apparently, Nordum had died in some accident, but they used some kind of advanced tech involving brain freezing to revive him. And somehow, Dino's consciousness ended up in Nordum's revived body. It's a massive leap.
A huge leap. Brain freezing, consciousness transfer that firmly plants the story in a far future setting, and Dino just went along with being Nordum.
Seems so. He decided to play along, keep his real identity as Paul Dino a secret. Smart move, maybe?
Probably wise, yeah. Avoid sounding completely crazy.
So soon after, he meets these lectors. Sort of spiritual guide types, but they're a bit vague. More importantly, he meets Jorbreger, who was Nordum's mentor, and Stefan, Nordum's best friend.
Okay, so people who knew the original Nordum.
Right. And they become his guides to this future world. They use this device, the Riggenswage. The video compares it to an iPad, basically to teach him about history.
Like a futuristic history lesson.
Yeah, but with a catch. They wouldn't or couldn't teach him anything about his own time, the 20th century.
Yeah, the classic time travel rule. Don't learn about your own past or present to avoid paradoxes, maybe, or just a convenient narrative device.
Could be. So what did Dino as Nordum learn about the future? From the 20th century up to 3906.
This is the core of the predictions, right?
Exactly. The diary says the 21st to 23rd centuries are rough. Overpopulation, big international conflicts. Basically, a lot of turmoil.
Sounds plausible, unfortunately. Any specifics?
Well, one big achievement mentioned is Mars colonization. Supposedly starts in 2124, builds up to a colony of 22 million people.
22 million on Mars. That's ambitious.
Yeah, but then disaster strikes.
Yeah.
Some massive impact event wipes out the colony. And apparently, that puts a stop to space colonization for a long, long time.
Oof. So a rise and fall, even in space, adds a darker twist to the usual sci-fi optimism.
Then there's a huge war. Starts around 2309, lasts 80 years, devastates Europe.
80 years? That's catastrophic.
Totally reshapes the continent. Interestingly, the diary notes the Baltic and Scandinavian countries mostly skip the worst of it, which, the story suggests, is why the language Dino heard in 3906 had those Anglo-Scandinavian traces.
Ugh, connecting the dots there. Okay, what happens after this massive war?
A new world government forms. Sounds good, right? But nope, it gets corrupted, run by oligarchs. This leads to, 2 centuries of resistance.
Another cycle of power and corruption.
Yeah, until eventually, power shifts. It moves towards, and this sounds idealistic, thinkers, humanitarians, and scientists.
A shift towards a more enlightened leadership. That's an interesting arc. It reflects a kind of hope for societal evolution, I suppose.
And the economy changes completely, too. They move from scarcity to adequacy. People work for the common good.
How does that work?
Initially, it was like a 40-year work commitment. But by 3906, it's down to just a 2-year compulsory service for everyone. Money, as we know it, is pretty much gone. Value is placed on art and science instead.
Wow. A post-scarcity, service-based economy focused on higher pursuits. That's a very utopian vision. Very different from the preceding centuries of conflict.
Totally. Then there's this other really strange event mentioned, around the year 3000 AD, called the Nebel Birch.
Nebel Birch, what's that?
It apparently grants some kind of spiritual power, called oversin or supersin, like a sixth sense maybe. But initially it was fatal to those people.
Fatal? That sounds more like a plague than a gift.
Right. But over time, it supposedly leads to the evolution of a new human subspecies. The diary calls them Homo occidentalis novus.
A new species of human.
Essentially. And these new humans, by 3906, apparently have no need for laws. They've evolved beyond conflict or crime, maybe.
That's a profound transformation, introducing a biological, almost metaphysical evolution. A society without laws implies a fundamental change in human nature itself.
It's pretty radical. And the diary paints the people of 3906 as generally carefree, almost childlike in their innocence. Oh, and they've apparently had peaceful contact with aliens, too.
Aliens, too? Okay, they've covered all the bases. And
Right.
what about the world itself? The technology?
Dino apparently saw this supercity called Norer, filled with amazing tech. Huge mansions built way up high, floating gardens, even cities built underground. Really imaginative, futuristic stuff.
So visually spectacular, technologically advanced, socially utopian, spiritually evolved. It's quite the picture of 3906.
It is. But amidst all this future shock, Dino starts feeling homesick.
Ah, the human element comes back in.
Yeah. He misses his old life, the 20th century, and especially his first love, a woman named Anna.
Anna?
He recalls this really poignant memory, their last meeting on a hill somewhere. And Anna promised him that the next time they met, she'd give him a wreath made of windflowers.
A specific romantic promise. That adds a nice touch of personal longing to the epic scope.
It does. And then comes maybe the weirdest moment of the whole future experience.
Okay, weirder than the body swap.
Possibly. He's on a day trip with Andreas Nordum's girlfriend. Her name's Sylvia. They go to a place that, unknown to Sylvia, used to be Duno's home village back in his time.
Okay, coincidence.
Gets stranger. While they're there, Sylvia, just spontaneously, gathers some windflowers, makes a wreath, and gives it to Dino, who's still in Nordum's body, remember?
No way. The exact same gesture Anna promised. Hundreds of years later.
Exactly. What do you even make of that? Fate. Reincarnation.
It's deeply strange. It hits you on an emotional level in the story. Stefan, the friend, apparently tries to explain it later, talking about reincarnation and how Sylvia's feelings for Nordum had shifted subtly after Duno's consciousness took over. It adds layers of metaphysical questions.
Definitely layers. So after about a year living as Andreas Nordum in 3906, experiencing all this, Dino falls asleep one night, for the first time since arriving in the future, apparently.
Yeah.
And he wakes up back in his own body. Back in the hospital bed, back in the 20th century. The year-long coma was over.
Just like that, a round trick. Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary.
The claim is just staggering, isn't it?
It really is. So, that's the story from the diary. Now, the big question, accuracy. You mentioned predictions.
Right. Our source, the Motec video, points out a few things that, looking back from now, seem, well, potentially predictive, especially for the early 1920s when this was supposedly written down.
Like what?
Things like growing environmental problems, the rise of individualism, the threat of nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons is a big one, if true for the 1920s. That predates their actual development significantly.
It does. Also, Mars colonization, flying vehicles, holographs used for traffic control, even alien contact. Some of that sounds familiar, right?
Some does, yeah. Environmental concerns were nascent. Individualism was a philosophical topic. Mars has been sci-fi fodder for ages. But the combination, and things like nukes or specific tech like holographic traffic,
Yeah.
it gives you pause.
It does give you pause. But then we have to hit the brakes, the counter-arguments.
Okay, let's hear the skepticism, because this sounds almost too neat.
Well, the video brings up the concept of false memories. It uses a real case, someone named Alpha Kabij, who had vivid, detailed, but totally fabricated memories after emerging from a coma.
Right, the idea that severe trauma, like a long coma, can cause the brain to essentially invent narratives, using bits and pieces from the subconscious.
Exactly. So Dino was interested in philosophy, history, the humanities. Could his brain have woven this complex future narrative from those existing memories during the coma, making it feel utterly real when he woke up?
That's a very plausible neurological explanation, isn't it? It accounts for the vividness without requiring actual time travel.
Plausible. Then there's the idea it's just fiction, made up.
By Dino, or Papahatsis later.
Either or both. The video points out similarities to H.P. Lovecraft's story, The Shadow Out of Time. Also involves consciousness projection across time during unconsciousness.
Ah, so the trope existed in fiction around that era. That's a strong hint towards literary influence rather than lived experience.
It is. And then there are the more practical, factual problems. Our source highlights them clearly. Like, there's no official record of a Paul Amadeus Dino living in Switzerland or Greece when he was supposed to be there. None.
That's a major red flag. What about the claim he fought for Germany under a different name?
Convenient, right. But totally unverifiable. Adds mystery but removes proof. And crucially, the original diary.
Let me guess. Lost.
Lost, of course. All we have is Papahatsis' published version from 1972. And all the sources tracing back this story seem to be Greek, starting only in the 1960s. Nothing earlier, nothing outside that circle.
So no independent corroboration, no original manuscript, questionable timeline of sources. It's starting to sound less like a historical account and more like, well, something else.
Something else indeed. Maybe, as the source suggests, a kind of narrative treatise on human spirituality written by Papahatsis himself.
Using the framework of Dino's story as a vehicle for his own ideas, that's possible.
And here's maybe the biggest nail in the coffin for the real diary idea. The basic plot apparently showed up in a Greek magazine before Papahatsis published the book in '72.
Oh. Well, that strongly suggests the diary narrative was developed before the book claimed to reveal it. That really undermines the whole premise.
It really does. Makes the lost diary look even more suspicious. Interestingly, the video briefly contrasts this with another time travel story, supposedly more convincing, from Ukraine in 2006, mentioned tangible proof.
Another rabbit hole for another time, perhaps.
Perhaps. But sticking with Dino, we've gone through the whole bizarre tale, the comas, the predictions, the journey to 3906.
And the very strong reasons to doubt its literal truth, from the lack of evidence to the potential for false memories or outright fabrication.
So the question remains hanging, doesn't it? Was Paul Amadeus Dino truly a man unstuck in time, a prophet? Or was this whole thing an elaborate hoax, maybe a coping mechanism for trauma, or perhaps a philosophical story created by his student?
We're left without a definitive answer, which is often the case with these compelling mysteries.
Absolutely. And maybe that leads to the final thought for you listening right now. Given how much we humans are drawn to these kinds of stories, the power they have, and given the real mysteries surrounding time, consciousness, what actually makes a story about the future feel believable to you?
Yeah, and what does our fascination with these tales, whether Dino's or others, tell us about ourselves? About our hopes, our fears for what's coming?
Something to ponder. Maybe that Ukrainian story holds different answers. But for Dino, the mystery lingers.
A fascinating dive, nonetheless. It really highlights that blurry line between what we experience, what we believe, and what we tell ourselves.